Hello, so this is quite a short lecture. We're going to look at the criminal offences relating to fraud. Now, the Fraud Act 2006 is a relatively new act, and that has replaced the old legislation surrounding fraud. There are now one statutory offence, but there are three ways you can commit it, so three ways you can get into trouble here. The first one, fraud by false representation. Now, like all the fraud offences, you need to be dishonest. So false representation is where you say something that isn't true. So you dishonestly make a false representation of fact or law. Now, a representation, that doesn't need to be just verbal, it could be written, it could be something you have misled somebody by making them believe something that isn't true. Now, also with fraud, you need an intention. And your intention is that you will make a profit out of your dishonesty, or at the very least that someone else may well achieve a loss as a result. It doesn't matter if they do or not, the fact is that you intended that to happen. Fraud by failing to disclose false information, again, you need to be acting dishonestly, and you need to have that intention to make a gain for yourself or cause a loss for another one. And that's exactly what it says, really. You don't disclose something that you should do. So something that you're under a legal duty to disclose. So for instance, maybe on an insurance application form, maybe on a loan document, where you fail to disclose that you have outstanding loans or that you've maybe been made redundant, something like that. And then the final one, fraud by abuse of position. Slightly different, but not massively. Again, we need the word dishonestly in there, and you have that intention to create a gain for yourself or cause a loss for someone else. But in this way, you commit the fraud because you are able to abuse a position that you occupy. Now, that position is something where you are in a position of trust, where you're supposed to safeguard the interests of another person. Maybe you are a trustee looking after someone else's money. Maybe you are the accountant in a business and you're trusted to look after that business's money. Maybe you are a company director. That's the kind of people who could commit fraud by abuse of position. Again, make sure you know the sanctions for this. The maximum penalty, 10 years, and an unlimited fine. So you could get clobbered with both of those. Now, fraudulent trading, we saw this when we looked at the director's duties and responsibilities. Now, fraudulent trading is a funny one because it's both a criminal offence and also what we call a civil offence. Now, a criminal offence, remember, the burden of proof there is beyond reasonable doubt. So to convict you of a criminal offence, the jury must believe that, they are pretty much certain that you did it. A civil offence basically means you're going to have to pay money, and the penalty for a civil offence doesn't lead to imprisonment, obviously, and therefore the burden of proof is the balance of probabilities. So it's more likely than not that you did it. Now, when do we commit fraudulent trading? Well, it's where a business is carried on with the intent to defraud the creditors of the company or someone else, or for any fraudulent purpose. Now, the criminal offence doesn't matter if the company's in liquidation. We'll see for the civil offence only applies where the company's being wound up. It applies to any person, so not just company directors, anybody who's involved in that fraudulent trading. And that means the company secretary, it could mean somebody in a financial role or a management role. But because it's the criminal offence, we need some sort of intent, some sort of dishonesty, and they're keywords to look for if you get a question on this. If you are convicted of fraudulent trading, that means that as a company director, you can be disqualified from acting as a director or otherwise in the management of a company under the CDDA. Again, it's a criminal offence, and the punishment, again, is 2 years or an unlimited fine. Or an unlimited fine. Now, the civil offence, which sounds wrong, doesn't it, to call it an offence and then civil, but the civil offence only applies if the company is in liquidation. So the company must be in the process of being wound up. And the way this happens usually is the liquidators will be called in to deal with the company, and they will notice that the directors perhaps haven't behaved appropriately. And therefore they'll make an application to the court to order that that director should make a contribution to the company's funds. And if the court agrees, they will make the order. So it's a financial penalty in effect. And what happens is that money is paid into the company, and that swells the assets available to the company, and therefore the creditors of the company will get a better return. So just pause the recording for a moment and read through Arnold. Okay, so we have a case where Arnold is a director of the company, and he knows that the company is unable to pay its debts. His finance director has told him. But somebody comes along with an unbeatable offer and he decides to take it, not necessarily because he is trying to steal money from his creditors, but because he thinks he might be able to save the company. Now, it's possible, as it says here, that Arnold could be guilty of fraudulent trading. But to be honest, he doesn't really seem to have that dishonest intention. It doesn't smell of dishonesty, does it? So it's probably unlikely. What's more likely is that the courts might look at the offence of wrongful trading. Now, this is a civil offence again, and you'll remember it from the chapter on directors' duties and responsibilities. And it pretty much has the same effect as the civil offence of fraudulent trading. However, it doesn't have the stigma. It doesn't have the dishonesty element. It's really a question of, should that director have known that the company had no prospect of paying its debts? So it's much more likely that the courts would take action under wrongful trading here. And the definition's just set out there to remind you. The director knew or should have known there was no reasonable prospect of avoiding insolvent liquidation. Much easier to prove because of that dishonesty point. Note here that this applies to directors only, and also that the company must be insolvent. Okay, so it's a little bit narrower than the offence, the civil offence of fraudulent trading. Okay, I think it's a good idea to stop there, and in the next chapter we'll move on to insider dealing.